No Jedi here anymore. Only dreamers like this fool.
Hey everyone, the Jedi Deralict here again, back with part 2 of Fixing Jedi. In my last, and also coincidentally first video, I laid out the foundation for the issues that I have with Return of the Jedi. If you haven't listened to that yet, I'd suggest giving it a listen before continuing here. In this video, we're going to get into my personal prescription for fixing those problems. That is to say, what I would have done differently if I were in a position to do so. As I made obvious in the previous video, a large part of what I felt was, we'll say lacking in Return of the Jedi, revolved around Han Solo, his treatment, his place in the story, or lack of the same. So one of my primary goals here is going to be to make sure that Han's character is treated better by the narrative, more in line with his treatment in previous films, and especially to make sure he has a definitive character arc in this part of his story. Of course, Han's characterization is not Jedi's only shortcoming, so I will have a focus on the overall tone and pacing, as well as a few other surprises. I think the easiest way to really illustrate my changes would be to sort of walk you through my version of the movie, with a focus on the parts that I would be changing, and a brief word on why that particular change, and what I think it would accomplish. So without any further ado, let's get to the long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. After John Williams' orchestral masterpiece and the letters fade into the star field, we're really going to start the movie in pretty much the same way. Vader's moments with Gerard, I never knew how to pronounce that. I'm going to go with Gerard. Vader's moments with Gerard warning him of the Emperor's arrival is flawless. It does a great job at delivering all the info it needs to, and really gives a sense of importance to the Emperor as well. Gerard's fear and anxiety when Vader tells him that Palpatine is on his way in person is almost chilling. So far, so good. A lot of the first act really worked well for me, and as such, not very much will be changing in the early moments. The droids still arrive bearing a message, they're still given as gifts to Jabba, we still find Han decorating the Hutt's inner sanctum as a warning to others. I even have no issue leaving the wart scene, with him slurping up another creature. We're just going to cut away before any, burping can happen. It occurs to me this might be a good time to address an elephant in the room: Luke's plan. Now, I have read many fascinating arguments and debates about how little sense his plan makes. I agree that the plan literally relies on half a dozen things going exactly the way that they did in order for it to even remotely work. But, I'm oddly okay with that. As easy as this phrase could be misused, we are dealing with the Jedi and the will of the Force. I can actually sort of smooth over the whole Luke's plan debate with a single line a bit later. I'll point it out when I do. In the meantime, we continue on the film, much as it originally is. Leia shows up dressed as a bounty hunter, thermal detonator, yada yada yada, Chewie is taken, Han is thawed. Not surprisingly, it's after Han's entrance we really start to see some changes. I mentioned in the last video that Han is frozen for 2 years. Now think about that. It's 2 years of the man's life he was out of commission. His friends, Leia, the whole universe went on without him. And yet that fact is completely glossed over, never brought up again after they leave Tatooine. I think that it's a remarkably wasted opportunity for the character to be reacting to, especially considering he has no real other character arc throughout the rest of the movie. I'll expand on this a bit, but we can start to lay the groundwork here, especially when you consider Han's relationship with Lando. Remember, last time Han saw Lando, he sold him out to Vader. Han was already in Carbonite when Lando had his change of heart and sort of made the transition to good guy. So Han has no way of knowing that even happened. And when Han comes to, Lando is wearing the armor of Jabba's guards. Seriously, how bad does that look? So we're going to add a scene right after Han is reunited with Chewie in the dungeon. Hearing the cell open, Han and Chewie brace for the worst, and Lando, still in disguise, emerges from the darkness into the cell. He looks around, and when he sees that no one's there, he kind of removes his helmet and says, "Look, we have to be quick. We don't have much time. Now Luke is on his way. Well, He actually only gets out the first part of that sentence because Han clocks him in the face, sending him sprawling. Chewie lets out a roar, getting in between them. General chaos breaks out in the cell. Han steps back, stunned, asks Chewie what the hell he's doing. He has some words with Lando before Chewie yells something at Han. Han's face falls. He obviously tells him what we already know. He stops, looks over at Lando, and reluctantly helps him off the ground. By the end of the scene, Han is beginning to already feel out of place, disjointed. It's something we will be building on a bit more later. Notice, by the way, that Han is not still blind at this point. I think the less we have to say about that, the better. Everything progresses. Luke shows up, tries to bargain, fails, falls into the Rancor pit, and ultimately escapes. In his rage, Jabba sentences them all to death at the Pit of Carkoon. On the way there, instead of a throwaway exchange between Han and Luke about dying where he grew up and it being convenient, we get to have the moment I referred to a bit earlier. A little bit more of a substantial conversation. Han instead chides Luke for his plan. They're all captive, about to die. Han sort of lets Luke know that obviously this isn't going well. I mean, let's face it, Han didn't have a whole lot of faith in Luke's ability to, quote, take care of himself, much less rescue anybody. But Luke just smiles and says, "Don't worry. Actually, everything is going just as I've foreseen it." Now, this line is important for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's going to highlight the struggle between the dark side and the light by foreshadowing the words that the Emperor is going to say to Luke later in the throne room. But more importantly, it sort of justifies Luke's plan in a way. Sure, everything had to go exactly as it did in order for Luke's overly complicated plan to work. But Luke is a Jedi now, and the implication is that he knew it would go exactly as it has. The Force told him so. Now, to be fair, this is and can be a dangerous precedent to set. Simply arguing the Force as a convenient explanation for everything that happens is really sort of a cheap writing shortcut, especially if it's overused. But if we use it carefully, here for instance, it really can foreshadow the Emperor's plan and demonstrate to the audience that this is the sort of struggle, the conflicting destinies that Sith and Jedi see in the Force. Here, it just works. Now, an extremely hot point among fans for years has actually been the movie's treatment of another well-loved character. I'm referring, of course, to everybody's favorite non-Mandalorian bounty hunter, Boba Fett. Now, to be clear, while I think Fett is a really badass-looking, cool bounty hunter in his own right, he's really one of those rare characters who has been elevated more by the fan base than anything that he specifically did in the movies. I mean, he played a decent part in the progression of events that took us through Empire Strikes Back. His role in Jedi is really kind of sad. He dies with a goofy scream and a burp, accidentally taken out in a gag by a blind man. While I'm not usually one to allow fan interest or popularity with a character change that character's direction in the story, I do think Fett could have been used much better than he was, especially since Han's main antagonist is going to be strangled to death by the end of this sequence. Boba is simply going to have to survive so that he can become Han's new antagonist for the rest of the film and his character arc. So during the fight at the Sarlacc pit, and after an actual struggle and a real fight, Han is able to damage Fett's backpack, sending him overboard and out of the fight. But as the heroes pull away amidst the sprayed debris of the sail barge, we're going to get a brief glimpse of Boba Fett picking himself up, watching intently as the heroes race away. Oh, and also 3PO doesn't get buried in the sand up to his knees from like a 10-foot fall. Seriously, that was just dumb. So now, we're going to sort of fast forward a bit through Luke's scenes on Dagobah. Despite the fact that many have argued about Yoda sending Luke to confront Vader, I know in Empire, both Yoda and Ben argued that Luke should not, under any circumstances, go after Vader, and now suddenly Yoda's telling him that confronting Vader is actually his final test. For those who have an issue with this or see it as a contradiction, I just want to remind you that Luke has clearly matured more than a little in the last several years. Maybe he has all the training he needed before he actually ran off, but the lessons of patience and control clearly had not set in yet, when he was emotionally tearing off towards Cloud City. This is clearly a different Luke, and this Luke is clearly more ready to face Vader with the right frame of mind than he was 2 years ago. Which is going to bring us to the Rebel briefing. I have always hated how loose and informal the whole briefing was, especially when compared with the briefings in A New Hope and Empire. What's most interesting is a single line that is all but glossed over. When General Nadine was briefing about the strike force who would be landing on the forest moon to blow up the shield generator, 3PO remarks that sounds dangerous, while Leia adds, I wonder who they got to pull that off. Of course, a second later, Nadine asks Han if his strike force is ready, eliciting a worried look from Leia. For a brief moment, like a second, like a split second. Then everyone is all smiles and volunteering, I'll go too. Including Luke, who casually strolls to the meeting for a hug and a few handshakes. Now, if you think about this, the idea that this was an extremely dangerous mission was just sort of swept away. All the tension and drama got sucked out of it, as everyone smiles at each other and volunteers for the command crew. You know, like they were all a bunch of teenagers talking about driving to the mall to get some orange Julius's. Now, in my version, if we take a moment to think about what Han's been through, suddenly everything falls into place. Han isn't expecting to come back from Endor. Once you start thinking about that, his entire character arc falls into place. Now think about this. He spent his entire life in the criminal underworld. He's defined by his role as a smuggler. Running jobs for the Crimson Dawn or Jabba, or living on the run from him. Working scams to try to pay off his debts, or just to make enough for another round of fuel for the Falcon. But by this point, Jabba's dead. The entire underworld is probably in chaos, and I seriously doubt Han would be able to simply jump back into working for another syndicate as word spreads about what him and his Jedi buddy did to Jabba. For the first time ever, Han has no price on his head, no one's looking for him, no scams to run. He has lost his purpose, and has no idea where his place in the universe is anymore. He also just lost 2 years of his life in Carbonite, while the universe went forward without him. He's out of place. Suddenly, Lando is general, Luke is an all-powerful Jedi, and even his budding relationship with Leia would have to feel awkward at this point. Without the knowledge that Luke and Leia are siblings, Han might even be wondering if they grew closer while he was gone, and if he's being edged out. In other words, what if Han is actually looking at his life the way Harrison did his character? No place in the story anymore, nowhere to go, and no use to anybody, except, maybe, as a sacrifice. So Han takes the mission to Endor. He volunteers knowing it's a suicide mission, not expecting to come back, and hoping that his whole wasted life can somehow be worth it if he can just accomplish this for his friends. Blow up the shield generator at any cost so the rebellion can win. This, in short, would be Han's character arc. He's resigned himself to die a hero, even if perhaps a bit misguidedly. So going back to the briefing, Leia comments, wonder who's crazy enough to accept that suicide mission, and when Nadine asks Solo if he's ready, Leia's reaction is far more potent than just momentary shock. Instead, she turns to Han and says, "What? No, you can't do this." Han tries to calm her down, and Leia turns to Nadine before he can say anything and insists they need to get someone else. All eyes fall on Leia, as Mon Mothma gently asks Leia if she has a personal objection to Solo leading the strike force. Leia goes silent, realizing that her objections are entirely personal and actually not in line with what's best for the rebellion. For a moment, Leia seems to concede, before looking up defiantly and offering, "I'm volunteering for the shuttle's command crew." Now, Han is the one that reacts. He knows the danger of this mission. He was not intending to survive it, and has absolutely no intention of letting her come along. They argue briefly, and the rest of the briefing sort of looks on anxiously. But before anyone can call for a bit of decorum, Luke's voice rings out, "I'm going too." What follows is a moment of mixed emotion. Han volunteered so that he could nobly sacrifice himself, but now Leia is going to make sure he can't. This isn't what Han bargained for. Although with Luke going too, maybe, just maybe, they have a real shot at surviving. But in any case, the stakes are suddenly much higher. And it's here I think I'm going to end this installment. Join me next time for part 3 of Fixing Jedi as we get into the Ewoks, the Battle of Endor, an unexpected confrontation, and a much better way for Leia to realize that she is a Skywalker. But until then, do you agree with me so far? Or disagree? Is there something that you think I missed, or just plain got wrong? Feel free to comment below, and please take a moment to hit like or subscribe, and maybe share the video to your favorite Star Wars group. Until then, may the Force be with you.